Hi, good morning and welcome. I'm really pleased to welcome Kavita Ramdas and the members of the Social Entrepreneurs in Residence at Stanford program, the SEERS program, which is a brand new program that Kavita started at Stanford. I've known Kavita for many years, mostly in her former capacity as the CEO of the Global Fund for Women. I've been a supporter of that wonderful organization for years. And Kavita has moved on to this really exciting new position at Stanford, and I am going to let her introduce the SEERS and tell you all about the program, and then Kavita will be the moderator for a group discussion. Thanks. Go ahead, Kavita.
Hi, everyone. This is really cool to be doing, presentation and knowing that various other people are going to be in different places, we hope. And if not, thank you for those of you who've come. It's really nice to see you. Thank you, Sharon and Radhika, for inviting us to be here at Google, and we really look forward to being able to build stronger ties between the Ripples to Waves program on social entrepreneurship at Stanford and Google. I am really pleased to be here with my 3 colleagues who are the first group of visiting social entrepreneurs at Stanford in this program. From my left, Ramzi from Palestine, Taida Horozovic from Bosnia, and Steve Williams from San Francisco. The program just was launched this April, and it essentially is a program that tries to connect theory with practice. Universities are places where you study lots of phenomenal things, including latest buzzwords like social entrepreneurship, but they are rarely places where those who actually do get to teach. And the program of social entrepreneurship is really a program to bring activists and practitioners from the ground into the campus, to have them be there for a whole quarter and to be part of actually teaching and leading a class. So the class that we are all a part of, which is a new class at Stanford, is called Challenging the Status Quo, Social Entrepreneurs Advancing Democracy, Development, and Justice. And it's been really a wonderful experiment. And I am really pleased to have the 3 who are with us, Ramzi, Steve, and Taida, were selected from a wonderful group of applicants, and we're hopefully going to try and share their stories with you, get a little bit of a sense of what it is that motivates someone to be a disruptor for social change. I wanted to begin, as I think for many of us, social change begins from a place of talking about our personal stories. As Sharon mentioned, I spent 14 years at the Global Fund for Women, and certainly my own motivation for being, as Gandhi said, the change I want to see in the world came very young. I started being righteously angry, I think at 4 or 5, when people would keep looking at the 3 of us. We were 3 sisters. We are 3 sisters, and saying, oh, what a pity to my parents, you only have 3 daughters. I decided that there seemed to be somehow a less than sign hanging in front of my forehead that I had somehow mistaken, and it wasn't my bindi either. And I really wanted to do something about that. And although I didn't know quite what I wanted to do about that as a young woman growing up in India, I think almost everything I did in the rest of my life was informed from that space of challenging that status quo and that reality. In the same way, what I wanted to share with all of you today and the audiences who will be listening to this is a little bit of a sense of the personal stories of each of the seers who's here. You can see that we're doing a little bit of a pun on the word. To be a seer is also to look into the future, is to have a vision of what that future looks like. So yes, they are social entrepreneurs in residence at Stanford, but also they are people who have a real vision for what they want to see for a fairer and more just world. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of that request to say what started you off on this journey of trying to make a difference in the world. And if I can, Steve, I would really like to begin with you and just get a sense of why it is you do what you do.
It's a little weird to be talking on a microphone to a smaller group, but I think for me this question, and I think for all of us, raises sort of the issue that in doing this work, there's sort of all of these different influences in our lives that sort of bring us to this work. And I think probably true for all of us. But for me, the thing that sparked sort of the initial desire to achieve full humanity for people was when I was 6. When I was 6, my family lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is a predominantly white community. And my best friend was this kid, Jay, who lived right next door, white kid. He was 6 years older than me. And so Jay had actually had his bike way longer than I had. So for a long time, I would like run behind him as he was riding his bicycle. It was too big for me, so, whatever. But when I was 6, I got my first bike with no training wheels. It was a Huffy, and, finally we were going to be able to go off jumps together and sort of, do skid outs in the garage. So I was very excited. And on this particular day, we were setting up the jump that we were going to go over, and another kid from the neighborhood, Robbie, came over. Robbie was a little bit younger. He hadn't gotten his bike yet. So he asked to borrow it. And so I said, it's fine, but, I want to be able to go over to the jump, so I want it back eventually. He was like, okay, it's fine. So he started riding around, and eventually I decided that his time was up. It was now my turn. And so I called out to him, Robbie, I want my bike back. And Robbie said, screw off, nigger. And I don't know if you've ever cut your finger, like with a really sharp knife. There's that moment where it hurts, but it hasn't started bleeding yet. And like you can't quite place the pain. And I think for me, that particular moment, like I didn't know what the word nigger meant, but there was a silence between Jay and I that I knew meant that something really grave had happened. So I didn't really know how to deal with it, so I picked up a rock and threw it at Robbie. It just so happened to hit him in the back of the head. And so Robbie threw the bike down, went running off to his house. I ran out to the street, picked up the bike, and Jay and I sort of parted ways without talking. I put the bike in the garage, and I think I went into the house crying, not really knowing what had happened. And a few moments later, I heard a knock on the door. Then my dad called me to the door, and Robbie and his dad were standing there. And my dad asked me whether I had thrown a rock at Robbie. He had a big welt on the back of his neck, so it seemed ludicrous to deny that I had done it. So I said that yes, I had done it, but I explained why it is that I had thrown the rock. And so my dad asked Robbie whether that was true, and Robbie denied it. So I immediately jumped into sort of like pre-legal mode of like, setting up my case and saying we could go talk to Jay, it's true, I wouldn't have thrown the rock otherwise, da, da, da. And so my dad then turned to Robbie's dad and said, well, I'm going to assume that did in fact happen, and I'm going to assume that you're going to talk to your son about why that was inappropriate behavior, and for now, I'll appreciate it if you'll get off of our porch. So my dad closed the door, and he's a little bit of a disciplinarian, my dad, so I was sure I was getting in trouble. I was going to be in trouble for a long time. And so he sat me down, and he asked me whether or not I knew what the word meant. I told him that I didn't. He explained it to me, but then said that I shouldn't have thrown the rock, but he appreciated that I had defended myself. And I think that particular moment and sort of how it is that my dad decided to react to it was really sort of what started me in believing that oftentimes people's humanity winds up being undermined and not respected. And it's easy to stand on the sidelines and critique how it is that people stand up for and defend their own humanity. But the important thing is that we do that. And so my dad, I think, really sort of set in motion the process for me of trying to build up the capacity of folks who've been marginalized, exploited, and oppressed to be able to assert our humanity to then be able to live in a better way.
Thanks, Steve. I know that we've been talking a lot in this program about, being able to connect our personal experience with our commitment to doing our work in the world. And I think that it's profoundly important to actually understand that, particularly in the context of trying to move social change forward. It's hard to turn to you, Ramzi, given what day it is today. We were talking before this meeting, and Ramzi just reminded us that this is a very special day in his family. Ramzi is Palestinian, and I really want you to share the story you shared with us this morning about what it is that, I'll give you this, what it is that motivated you to become somebody who was really an activist for human rights and for social change in Palestine. And if you could share that with us as Steve has, that would be wonderful.
This very day, on May 15th, 64 years ago, my grandmother was living in Jerusalem. She was 14. That day, she lived in Atamon, which was at the time a fancy part of Jerusalem. And that day, she was forcibly expelled, her and her entire family. She was lucky she didn't end up in Jordan or Lebanon or Egypt. She actually went to Ramallah. She was, along with 80% of the inhabitants of Palestinians who were expelled that day. Actually, one person sits in the audience is actually his family as well. Went to a refugee camp next to Hebron. That day is a seminal point of all Palestinians. I didn't know this for a long time growing up because my parents wanted to, didn't want to bring this across to me. I didn't understand why my father, when he was doing his master's here, he was doing his master's in the US, actually sent my mom, when she was pregnant with me, to Jerusalem to be born there and then go back, me and her back. So now I have no papers thanks to that, but that was a defining moment that we don't. I live 15 minutes away from Jerusalem in Ramallah. It's been 12 years I haven't entered because people from different color IDs, Palestinians are issued 3 different color IDs, blue, green, and orange. And depending on the color ID, they can go. It's who you're born to and where you're born. It depends on that. One of the things right now is that I went back to, I lived in the diaspora, and I went back to Palestine, or in Ramallah, was to bring TED to Palestine. I organized a TEDx conference there. One of the defining moments that made me just realize the urgency of this, and I realized going from community to community and finding, and I think this is true wherever you find the world in the world, where there's great adversity, you find amazing, inspiring people, wherever it is in the world. And I found inspiring people from different parts of the communities. And that just inspired me to stay for longer. It took me, what started off as a small project, took me over 1.5 to 2 years to organize. And one of the defining moments there was I was seeing somebody. She was this great woman. She's very driven, very great. And it didn't work out. And one of the reasons it didn't work out was because I had a green ID, and she had a blue one. And in 2002, there's a marriage law that Palestinians from different color IDs can't live together. And that was, and actually I had no idea that until that moment how discriminatory this ID system was. And then from then we started to realize that if I didn't know this, I was born here, and I didn't know this, how come most people don't? And started a project called Visualizing Palestine, where create visual stories for social justice. It's based on infographics, information design, digital technology to change that.
Thank you, Ramzi. One of the challenges that we've had in terms of bringing these different stories into the spaces, both at the university and at other places, is how distant these places seem from our own experience. And when Ramzi shared this today, one of the things we realized is that his grandmother was 14 years old when she became a refugee. And we were sitting next to someone, Taida, who became a refugee from her homeland in Bosnia when she was 14 years old as well. And I wonder, Taida, if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what made you someone who became passionate about making change in Bosnia.
Sure. Well, it's an early memory of war for me, and it's an experience that made the war very real to me. So when I was 13, the war broke out in my homeland. It's ex-Yugoslavia, and today it's Bosnia and Herzegovina. And many of you, I'm sure, have heard it's the bloodiest conflict in Europe after World War II. And I was 13, so I'm from Banja Luka, which is the northwestern city, second biggest city in the country. And when the war started, there was a siege of Sarajevo, which is the capital. And the siege in Sarajevo was including the bombing and massacres and people being killed in bread lines. And we could all watch it on TV. Everybody in the world watched it on TV. But in my hometown, there was a different kind of siege and ethnic cleansing that was not something you could watch on TV. It was quiet, it was silence. And people were disappearing in the night. People were trying to get out of this whole area with humanitarian convoys. And there was also a 10 p.m. curfew that none of us kids really cared too much about, and we would still hang out in front of our building. And my mom would have to call to me from the balcony to, come back inside, which, she would call to me for a long time, and I was not always responsive. When I think about it today, I'm sure she was terrified to have to call out my name, because my name is actually Muslim, and even though I'm not religious, people were exiled from this region because they're Muslim, because they're non-Serb actually, so they were also Roman Catholics. And there was a Bosnian Serb army that was sort of leading the war basically in the genocide in our country. So two of my best friends were at that time living on the 6th floor, and I was living on the 7th floor. And they were Tatsa and Jana, still are, to my knowledge. And I remember Tatsa and I, we had some kind of a dispute, some kind of quarrel about something. I have no idea what it was. And I remember she turned to me and she said, "What do you know? You don't know anything. I'm going to tell my dad to kill all those people in Manjača." And Manjača is a mountain close to the hometown where we would go sledding and skiing in the winter. And we learned that the people that were disappearing in the night were put in this concentration camp up on that mountain. And I just remember my head being, in my mind, going completely like it was on fire. Like I had no idea, what to do in that situation. I just wanted to get out of that situation. And I wanted to kind of sound strong and smart. And I said something like, "You don't have that power." And I just tried to go home and get out of the situation. And I remember talking to my mom and dad and, saying, "Oh my gosh, I was terrified that these people are actually going to be killed because of me," because she got mad and her dad was in the army and had a gun. And it just made me realize that the war that I was watching on TV is actually right there at my doorstep. And I feel like that event kind of ended my childhood at that age. And I just feel like I had to grow up so quickly. And I started being much more careful just about the decisions I was making, being a teenager or adolescent at that time. So what it made me realize is that, today, 20 years later, because it's 20 years since the war started this year, is that, war scars you forever. But if you are lucky to survive, to live through it, then you can be a survivor, and you can actually learn from that experience and choose not to be a victim, which I think is very important, because it made me realize that every day we wake up and we make a decision to live a violence-free life. So it's an ongoing daily decision, or sometimes a challenge even, but every day we wake up and we choose to live a violence-free life. And it's something that's really, really important. And so in my work, I create spaces where we can have a dialogue and act to ensure that we choose a violence-free life. So that's, I think, very, very empowering decision that we get to make every day.
Thank you, Taida. Ramzi, I want to come back to something you said, because you talked about the fact that this personal experience of the sense of being in exile and then this pain of not being able to be with the person you loved was sort of a point in which it also influenced what you decided to do. You're a structural engineer. You should be sitting in the audience with these guys, right? This is your space.
More Prison Break.
But maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it is you did choose, what it is you choose to do, and what you're doing now, and how that led you. If you can share that a little bit, and how that may have led you to being a part of this program on social entrepreneurship.
So as I was living in the West Bank, in the territories, I realized that one of the major, there's a lot of amazing people working on the ground. Anybody who wants to do anything else, coding, they'd be here. But people who were on the ground were actually working to impact the lives of their community for the better. And at the time, that was, until now, it's the occupation. One of the things that really was very necessary, and we actually saw this yesterday, was for people to care. And right now, for example, yesterday, over 1,500 Palestinian prisoners who just ended their hunger strike. Some of them have been not eating food for 77 days. The last time that's happened, well, not the last time, one of the times that happened was 1989. South Africa, 800 prisoners were on hunger strike. Guantanamo Bay, 200 prisoners. What ultimately led to the end of this hunger strike and for the concessions was the world to care. There are hundreds and maybe upon thousands of people who are held without charge or trial. So one of the things is that what I'm trying to do is use digital technology and visual information to allow people to know and to care, and to live in a world where we're all equal, or where we're not discriminated by our ethnicity or religion or color.
Ramzi, Visualizing Palestine has a website. It just launched. I know you were worried about not being able to share some of those images, because I think, when you're using visual technology and graphics to tell a story, and then you're actually hampered by the old-fashioned use of words and actually talking to people, would you want to share that with our audience at Google, and also tell a little bit about, why did you decide that it was a good moment to come to Stanford and spend some time in a program where you'd be able to maybe share what you've been doing?
So the first visual we created was what's the physiological effects of total voluntary fast. So what do people go through when they're on hunger strike? And it's a very moving image, because how much injustice must occur for one to do that. So the reason that I accepted coming here, even though I'm in the middle of a huge endeavor, was that Stanford and Silicon Valley is in the heart of digital technology, visual information, visual design, and that there are a lot of people here that are storytellers. I think one of the best storytellers in the world currently is here. And I'm receiving a lot of, for example, working with faculty, some of them are really receptive, such as the D School, who want to maybe do something around social impact using this kind of technique. So that's one of the main reasons that came here, and it's been very, very enriching
Where can people find more information about visualizing Palestine?
Visualizingpalestine.org. That's the website. We just launched it, and we'll start releasing them periodically. So.
Taida, you are at a different moment. You talked about what made you a passionate advocate for peace, and the organization that you founded in Bosnia was one that was particularly outraged by the lack of violence-free life, not just for all Bosnians, but in particular for women. And I know the Global Fund for Women was a proud seed investor in the work of SURE. Would you share a little bit about what the organization you led does and did in Bosnia, and what you are hoping to get from this program at Stanford?
Sure. Yeah, so Cure Foundation, Cure, it's spelled Cure. It's bilingual. In Bosnian, it means girls or young women, and in English, it means feminisms can cure our communities. And we started that in 2004 with the idea to use media and take back public spaces to transform gender stereotypes, to display and talk about the realities of women that are existent and not very well represented through arts or media, for that matter. And so we work through education, culture, and arts. We started the festival called Pitchwise. It means havoc or creative chaos in our minds in Bosnian, and in English it could mean pitch wisely, I guess, choose to do things that have a positive social change or have a good impact as opposed to a destructive one in the world. And it's still the only festival of women arts in our country, running for 7 years, so I'm very, very happy about that. And the organization has done a lot to revive the women's movement that existed before the war, and the movement is not just an immense amount of nonprofit organizations that are registered. A movement is a people, different diverse people who are from all walks of life, who are journalists and architects and educators and mothers and so on. So our idea is to bring everybody together to work on this very urgent issue, which is #1 health issue in our country, and it's violence against women. Women are not only the majority population in my country, they're a majority population in the world. Just like we live on a planet that is predominantly made of water, so just think about how we cannot live without water. So we, should think about how women make up more than half the population in the world, and how that is a huge potential that is still not being on an equal level, meaning having access to education, having access to economic development, and so on. So I'm very proud that we have a new generation of young women running SURE or Cure, and I was doing a lot of ad hoc activism, which is sometimes very draining, and you don't really get to reflect on the process and what's happening to you personally, because there's so many pressing issues and situations to respond to. And my plan was to only do it for a little bit, and I ended up staying for 10 years, but for 7 years I worked at SURE, which is great. I would not change a thing. And I needed to reassess what's going on with my own life and what I want to do next. So I formally stepped out end of last year, and thankfully we have fabulous women, leading the way. So this opportunity at Stanford was really sort of at this ideal time for me to be able to reflect on some of the work and to see where I can be effective next. So very appreciative of a very dynamic environment at Stanford with the students, and I found that a lot of people are still raising eyebrows to the term feminism, and why do we need feminism, and we're so over feminism, and can't we just use another word like equalism? And so then we get into a conversation about how it's not just the one feminism, there's feminisms, and what are they all, and what do they represent? And not so long ago, women were not able to vote, or there's still places where they can't drive or vote or have access to property ownership and so on. So I think for me, it was very interesting to talk to students at Stanford about some of these issues and gender equality as a great potential to transform our society and bring equality for everyone. And it's something that I'm really still very passionate about.
Thanks, Taida. Steve, you share something with Taida in that you too, this last year, stepped down from having led an organization that you were a founder of. And you have something else which is a little strange, which is that you actually left Stanford as an undergraduate and went to San Francisco to get involved with social change work with very low-income people. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with us about what the work of power was and where it is, again, like Taida, what it was that inspired you to come be a part of Ripples to Waves?
Yeah, so for the last 15 years, I've had the good fortune of working at this community-based organization in San Francisco, the home of the 2010 World Series champion San Francisco Giants. And I think similar to what Taida and Ramzi mentioned, like I sort of went into the work thinking that it was going to be a short-term gig. Like I was going to be there for a couple of years, and then I was going to go to law school. And 20 years later, my mom's still asking me when I'm going to get a real job. But I think similar to what Ramzi mentioned, like in situations of incredible adversity, like you find these amazing people. And when I was in school, I remember reading a lot about social problems, and one of the threads that I think connected all of the theories and articles and books that I read was this notion that in some ways poor people were responsible for their poverty, that there was something deficient in their ability to be able to navigate the world that then ultimately resulted in their inability to be able to make ends meet. And my experience in San Francisco couldn't have been more opposite than that. Like I met the most courageous, brave, intelligent people that I've ever met. And I think through the process of being at power, which started in 1997 with a commitment to eradicating poverty and oppression once and for all. So it was a small, ambitious organization. And I think for us, we saw that there were particular changes that were happening in the economy that were not just impacting women, people of color, folks who'd been marginalized for generations, but there were changes happening in the economy that were ultimately going to wind up impacting millions of people. And then the question of, well, what does economic justice look like? How is it that we're able to reorganize the economy such that it meets the basic needs of everybody becomes a central question, not just for a small percentage of the population, but for the 99% or for the 100%. And so for me, the work that Power's done most recently has been fighting for free transportation for all young people. I know that Google actually provides transportation for its employees to be able to get to work because it's an important thing to come to work. It's also relatively important to come to school. But the San Francisco School District, because of budget cuts, has been forced to eliminate yellow school bus service. So kids are then responsible for getting to and from school on their own. In the last 3 years, the cost of riding Muni in San Francisco has more than doubled. And at the same time, San Francisco has put police officers on the buses to write tickets to kids and adults who haven't paid their fare. And so, it's a particular problem for everybody. It's an especially pointed problem for undocumented immigrants. And so the members of Power ultimately took up a campaign to win free public transportation for all low-income, or for all young people in San Francisco. And they won just 2 weeks ago after I had stepped down. So the organization is continuing, I think, some of the most important work in the city. But the decision ultimately is going to be made by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So there's opportunities for folks to lobby the members of the MTC, and you can Google that to find out all of their contact information. But for me, I guess the reason I decided to leave Power was because the organization has this mission of eradicating poverty. And it's clear that we're doing some very important work and developing leaders who I think will ultimately guide a social movement to create economic justice. But we're in a situation where we need more than what it is that we've been doing for the last few years, where 6 million people across the country have had their homes foreclosed upon. More than 11 million people are underwater with their housing. I mean, I think the advent of the Occupy movement really touches on sort of real frustration with the way that things are moving. And I think, in my mind, there has been a lack of rigor in trying to understand social problems in order to then try to figure out solutions. And to me, the exciting thing of being able to go back to Stanford, like having gone to this working class high school where I sort of like Ferris Buellered my way through, like going to Stanford and getting my butt kicked for the first quarter and learning what it meant to really study. I think I brought a lot of that rigor into my work to win economic justice. But I think that there are some massive questions that are facing all of us. And so I wanted to take some time to then be able to reflect on that. And to me, having the opportunity to sort of go full circle and grapple with these questions with professors, with students, was this incredibly unique opportunity that I was excited to take advantage of.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the fact that I want to have, at least with our small group of people who are still here, time for some questions as well. So I'm just going to ask each of you to sort of, you all have sort of a vision, coming back to the notion of being seers, of, what it is you want to see and, where it is you kind of want to take sort of your next step. So I was wondering if maybe we could finish with, whoever wants to go on that, on that topic, just, a sentence about sort of what your vision is, and then what you really need to be able to kind of make that real. And Ramzi, I think you began to touch on it by saying, a little bit about the kinds of skills that visualizing Palestine is going to require. But if I could ask each of you to do that, and then we'll throw it open for questions.
So I've come to the realization that there's immense amount of injustice, and the only thing that will actually help solve it is collective community action. That's it. And how so is communities coming together, like what happened in Tahrir, and of all ethnicities and all religions coming together for universal values. So what I'm looking for is, how do we help do that? How do you harness the powers of digital technology, of visual storytelling, information design, all these different disciplines for that end to come together and believe in a just world. So one of the things that I'd love to help is we are looking for designers and information architects and things. If those are people who, I know in the Valley is something extremely difficult to do. Yeah, but yeah. So I'm not even looking. I'm just saying,
Thank you. Thanks, Ramzi. I'd have to circle back to you and have you finish that thought, but.
Yeah, sure.
I think for me, the vision is certainly, I've learned a lot about how being an activist and working to respond to these ad hoc situations can be, it's not sustainable. It's not a really sustainable way to live. So to me, I think it's very important to look at where I'm going to be able to be effective next, to look at a model of work that is similar to the Global Fund for Women, but for the Balkans. So I'd be very interested to look at different funds that give for women human rights that are flexible and not necessarily where you have to be a nonprofit organization that is registered. And sometimes you have a good idea and you shouldn't have to wait 3 years to prove yourself and be credible, to receive support to do something. Or if you are an artist and you want to do an exhibition in 3 months, you should get support to do that. So I know how much that meant to our organization, starting different artistic events and giving free services for youth to talk about gender relations and to talk about identity and to talk about social justice that is not in the textbooks, that is not included in the classroom. So I would be very interested in that. And I think also specifically for women, economic security or having an opportunity to have a job and to be paid for that job is a platform that really allows for a person to make decisions about their own life. So I would for sure be very interested to look at ways to contribute to job creation for youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina and for women specifically, but also in the Balkans and globally. I have to say, my home country is Bosnia and I love it, and I'm very passionate about issues that I feel are burning issues, but I recognize, obviously these are global issues that we're facing every day.
Taida?
Activists in New York are pushing to create an ordinance, a living wage ordinance, that would essentially ensure that any private firm that has a contract with the city is then required to pay a living wage to its employees. The mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, said that it was socialism. And it seems to me that we are at too important of a juncture in human history to be able to not rigorously and with a real seriousness address the problems of the economy. Between the economic problems and the ecological problems, to dismiss sort of ideas of working people actually being paid a living wage as socialism, which I'm assuming Michael Bloomberg means is a bad thing, means that we're not stepping up to the task that's in front of us. And I think that both with the Occupy movement, but then also there are organizations like Power all across the country. And I want to try to facilitate building a movement where those organizations are able to connect with one another, to lead in a serious conversation about what does it mean to reorganize the economy such that it meets the needs of people and the planet. And the difficulty is that a lot of those organizations are under-resourced and disconnected. And so in my mind, one of the things that I'm really hopeful about is with the advent of technology, and particularly things that are being developed at Google, that can serve a purpose of connecting organizations to then be able to share stories, share strategies, and really begin to develop a vision of an economy from the bottom up. And so if there are people who are interested and have ideas about those levels of technological innovation, it'd be great to have conversation about them.
That was great. I just want to add, when Tahir was going, there was an employee from Google, an employee from Twitter that teamed up, and because
this is Tahrir Square.
Tahrir Square in the uprising in 18 days where millions of people were pouring into Square, the government was beginning, set panic. They shut down internet. People couldn't communicate anymore. People couldn't come together anymore. So one person from Google, one employee from Twitter came together and said, okay, there's a problem. How do we fix this? And they fixed it or one way they attempt to fix it is that they give an ability for people in Egypt, in Cairo, to call a number and it would automatically tweet. There are, and that was without even the management of Twitter and Google, without them knowing. But this is just the pure innovation, when people are coming together, just knowing that there's something coming in and using technology and using digital design to do something like that. I think there's a huge potential for tech companies, design firms, all to harness it for positive.
So I'm going to open it up to any of you. I want to thank each of the three of you, and I want to say that my vision for Ripples to Waves and the program at Stanford is that we can continue to have these kinds of voices. I think you can have a sense of how different it is to have these kinds of voices inside a classroom, where people are used to hearing sort of a very, so we've had this really interesting momentum of like academics coming in and talking about democracy, and then Ramzi saying, yeah, well, we tried democracy and what it got us was, this. Or Taida saying, yeah, well, there's democracy allegedly after the Dayton Accords in Bosnia and women still get treated like this. Or Steve being able to say, and by the way, this is not just some stuff that happens in those developing countries out there, but this is actually real and alive, and it's right here in our backyard. It's in East Palo Alto, it's in Oakland, it's in San Francisco. And I think, my hope for the program is that we get it to a place where it's really, when I first told Ramzi about this idea, he said, oh, but doesn't a program like that already exist in every university, that you would bring activists to campus and they would be part of the teaching? And I was like, no, actually it doesn't. This is the first pilot that we're doing. But my vision is really that we will be in a world 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where whether it's through technology or whether it's the physical presence, that we will have a world in which the knowledge and experience of activists on the ground, social entrepreneurs who are making a difference, will actually be available to those of us who are learning about making a difference as early as possible, and as often as possible. So thank you very much, and we're open to questions. So. Does anybody have any comments or remarks or anything you want to know more about? Something that you...
So if you want to ask a question, also we should get it, use the mic. I don't know, can we take questions from remote sites? I don't know if we can take questions from the remote sites if they can talk to us. They can? Okay, I hear that they can. So if you're at a remote site and you want to ask a question, just speak up.
Thank you, please. Do you want to use this? Yeah, come on.
So I was asking Kavita earlier, and I'll say the same thing. I feel like there's a lot of people want to get involved, and they agree to the idea of it, but you kind of want to learn more about doing it without disrupting, everything you're doing currently. And so just going off that, I think there's tremendous opportunity for Googlers or pretty much anyone to learn through a program like this and what it does, and to maybe take the ideas back in some form to later on in your life, or to your home countries like India for me. And so going off that, I was just wondering if there's ways to get involved with the SEERS program and do it more as a part-time opportunity.
That's a great question. So one thing is to check out our website, which is http://psc.stanford.edu. It's easy to remember, but Program on Social Entrepreneurship, psc.stanford.edu. And the opportunities, I think, to be engaged are both to be engaged with particular projects that come up through the SEERS who are visiting. And so, you might say, well, what I'd really like to do is I'm a graphic designer and I'd really like to be able to be connected to what Ramzi is doing. We will have profiles of we actually already have profiles of each of the visiting social entrepreneurs on our website. And then hopefully, eventually, we'll have a place where people can actually say, this is how you can contact this person if that's something you want to do. We also are a very lean organization right now with just one staff person, myself, and a part-time administrative assistant. So any kind of volunteer support in terms of logistics, in terms of being able to get in front of, I think the three things we need most is to spread the word about the organization. We need to be able to make connections to like-minded organizations, either fantastic people who you think could really use a quarter on Stanford's campus and whose stories should be told and who need to be more visible in terms of their work, or connections to organizations that can help either the SEERS themselves or the program Ripples to Waves. And then finally, we need investors. It would be great to have support from both corporate and individuals. We've already raised over, a program like this costs about $17,000 per visiting Social Entrepreneur, and we are trying to bring 8 of them to campus in a year, so in 2 cohorts, 4 and 4. But overall, the program costs, including staffing and travel and conference costs, it costs a little under $400,000 a year, and so we're always also trying to raise resources for that. So those are some of the things we could use help with, and again, we really look forward to being able to hear more from any of you. I don't know if any of you want to add anything on particular. Okay, Ramzi?
If there are people who want to do maybe want to talk or have a workshop or discuss ideas or brainstorm ideas, maybe that's something they can just feel free to come out and sit down and maybe with a group and say, understand. I think that's the.
Oh, I was just going to say I would echo that. Many different workshops on a variety of topics and issues to be addressed, and I know I would love to talk about some of the initiatives that I'm involved with and that I'm interested in, and I'm confident I have a lot to learn from you girls and guys.
Any other questions?
I think we're almost at 12, so
Yeah, I think we can just go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming. It's
Great.
really interesting.
Thank you.